Hello and welcome to the garden. Today is a foggy day, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for me, as the colors are all vibrant and bright, to showcase the design of the garden from a higher up view. I think it's really important when you look at a garden to consider what is the view from all different angles. So this is such a beautiful view. You can see that I've got some work that I'm doing right now. I've got those beautiful Spanish lavenders. They are in some plastic. They will be coming in later on today. I'm also working on cutting back some of the plants to put the garden away for the winter. So this is such a lovely day for me to showcase how to think about your garden in all seasons and to design for all different features that you need to consider. First of all, consider where the wind primarily comes from, and also consider privacy. For us, we have a very windy corridor, which is this area over there. We also have a parking lot right over here. We have a bunch of office buildings there. There is a big field over here where people walk around. And then way over on that side, there's some apartment buildings. So although the yard looks very private, it's because we've built it that way. It's actually not all that private at all. So we really tried to think of what are the structures that we could put in place to give us a much more private oasis. One of the first things we considered was putting in some evergreens, and you can see them right over here. Those three were put in place to obstruct the view from the neighbor's yard that directly led into the parking lot. Now you're probably thinking, yeah, but there's a fence there. Originally, there was no fence. There was a very shabby chain link fence that did not have a top support, and deer could jump right over it. And even though we're in a city, there's still enough green space that the deer could come into the yard. Over here to the left, our neighbor had lots of dogs, and those dogs would always bark at us and sometimes run the chain link fence and make us feel uncomfortable. At the back here, there was a fence over here, and then there was a fence over to the right. The fence right at the back in a big windstorm fell down. At the time, my children were still fairly young, but old enough to be able to come home from school by themselves. They came home one day to find a young adult jumping on our trampoline. That obviously caused us some concern, and we immediately decided that we needed to replace the fence all around the yard. The trampoline incident also, from a privacy, security, liability perspective, made us take that trampoline down right away, and we've actually never put it back. We also wanted to get the fence put in around the whole yard and make it look consistent, because with 4 different styles of fence previously, that was part of the reason we hadn't done anything. It was, how could we create a cohesive look for this yard? You can see now the fence is pretty much all the same around the whole yard. There's varying heights of it as we deal with the different yard, levels, because this yard does slope into the back. So we had to figure out ways to create a private oasis and deal with the codes that are around building a fence. And you need to check your own city code to make sure that you're building your fences appropriately. As you design your yard, you're going to want to think about all the different design elements that make up a beautiful space. Thinking first about privacy is the most logical way to start, because once you build for privacy, other things fit into the plan. So for us, we started with trees, and we selected trees that had a shorter height. And by that particular sizing, what I was looking for were trees that grew from 20 to 30 feet, but also the bottom of the tree was more likely to start at around 6 feet. I wanted things that would be sort of at the top of my fence, so that it would give me the most amount of privacy as the eye would see. And so if somebody was walking in that field in the back, they couldn't see in. I also thought about evergreens so that I could have some elements of structure and privacy throughout the winter as well. I also thought about color and what was the color that I was going to have in the fall. And you can see, I think we did a pretty good job of establishing different color tones in this garden. Once you've thought about privacy, then start to think about what is the use that your yard is going to have. For us, we knew we needed a green space, a nice big patch of lawn. We had a small dog and we needed a place for the dog to run. We wanted a space for our trampoline back in the day. We also wanted a spot where we could kick the ball, throw the frisbee, just have a play space that kids could run around in. So we left a good amount of lawn, but we also wanted to build rooms throughout this yard so that we could have different ways that we could use trees and shrubs to create more elements of privacy. So the space in the back there where you see this cute little arrangement, just right there, that used to be where our kids' play set was. And so the kids could run along the grass and go into their little tree fort and their swings and their slide and their sandbox. And it was just a nice little spot, and it was semi-shaded, which is really important when you are thinking about place areas for your children. It was a really nice spot, but we also found that the grass over time died because kids are hard on spaces, and that extra amount of shade also made it hard for the grass to grow. When the kids were beyond using their tree fort and their swing set, we replaced it with that cute little deck. So let's talk about that as a room. When we created this yard, we thought of rooms. So originally that room was a play area for the kids, and now it's a little room at the back, which is one of the few areas that gets the sun in the late summer days. When we built the area where the little pink table is, that's another room, and I used that gate as an entrance into that room. So it was really established as another room. We also altered the use of grass there and put in the stone. The stone was put there because the walnut tree, the grass would not grow under it, and so we needed something that would allow water to get through to the roots to the walnut tree, but could also make us not have an ugly patch of mud sitting underneath the tree. So the stone worked really, really well. We also built all of these levels of decks. So you can see here's another little seating arrangement. I've just brought in the marble table that sits out there. It sits in my living room all winter long. And then over here, we have the area where you can sit and have a meal that also has an umbrella. So we've used things like umbrellas for extra privacy. In the back there's an awning that goes over that section that also gives privacy. And then we've used trees as an element of privacy as well for all of these spaces that you see. So I've come outside to show you the design elements at play. This is the view that you would typically see when you're in my family room and kitchen. And it's also the primary view that we take in every single time that we are enjoying the garden. As a result, looking forward into the yard, this was the area that I needed to build the most amount of privacy for us to be able to enjoy the garden without feeling we had too many people staring down at us. The first thing I did was put those Colorado blue spruce in, and in fact they're not Colorado blue spruce because Colorado blue spruce grows to about 75 feet. I believe this was called blue eyes spruce, and it is supposed to only grow to about 25 feet. It is much higher than that now, but it is a dwarf variety of blue spruce. And I chose those varieties because they were perfect for the space and for the vista that I wanted to create. In front of that, you see a magnolia tree, which also adds to the element of privacy. You can't really see the fence anymore, which is good because fences are usually not that beautiful. So I tried to actually put green in front of all of my fences just to give it another softer approach into the yard. In front of the magnolia tree, I've put the feature pot and then the pink table and then more things. So I've actually sort of built this layering of the garden, and it takes you back. And I designed that so that it had this focal point into the yard so that you were constantly looking at something new, and that the eye wasn't just settling on the view to the parking lot that you could see at one point. So all of these things were really thought out in terms of how I could build a space that gave us a sense of calm, a sense of peace, and a sense of privacy. Now over to the side here, where you can see the barbecue, there's also a cedar hedge. That hedge used to go all the way to the post, but when the walnut tree was there, it wasn't getting enough sun and it was slowly dying. So the benefit of the walnut tree leaving means that that shrub has actually been reinvigorated, which is good because it's a lovely privacy screen between us and our neighbors. But what I've also done is created a post here in the deck design, as well as that obelisk with the mandevilla climbing up it. And that's actually another element of privacy for us so that we don't see into our neighbor's backyard. As well, when you come over to this side, I've done the same thing with these corner arrangements. They are an element of building privacy. Now, between us and our neighbors, I don't really have a privacy screen. There used to be a beautiful double French lilac just beyond our deck that was the screen between us and the neighbor, but over the years it has died. And so I no longer have a tree that gives us that lovely element of shade. I have tried other plants in the area, and it's a real difficult area to get things to grow. So I need to think of how I can create more privacy. Our neighbor has just built a new deck, and that deck is now raised at the same level as ours, so it does impede on privacy. However, we really like our neighbors and we say hi, and instead of pretending that we don't see each other, we actually just acknowledge that we're out there, and then we get on with our days. As you walk into this part of the yard, you'll see that the ground cover is stone, and as I mentioned before, that ground cover was to avoid the mucky poor grass that used to grow underneath the English walnut tree. The other thing that the stone does is it creates a physical change as you walk. So as I'm walking right now, I'm on the deck, and so it's a quieter step, but when I step onto the actual stone, you can hear the change in my footstep. So that also makes you appreciate that you're into a new room. Now, each of these rooms has multiple ways that you can get out of it. You can see I've built some pathways that would take you around this tree into another walkway. I've also created some grand entrances into my rooms. So for this particular part of the garden, this entranceway has got these really nice little side pieces on it that I can put plants. Right now what you're seeing is the Spanish lavender. It was 17 degrees yesterday and went down to like 7 last night, so I wanted to protect the heat in them because they're coming in today. I didn't want to shock them when I brought them in. Now, typically you can see those, and they have this beautiful cascading flower arrangement on it, and it's just such a beautiful entranceway. Beyond this entranceway, I've also put those balls, and those balls just sort of give you I want to go see what's over there. So I'm trying to draw your eye into the next space as you come and enjoy each space. Now there's another little sort of sitting room over here, and that's where you find these chairs. Those are just wooden chairs. I believe they're wood. I believe that they're from a company called Woods, and they're just made out of wood, and unfortunately they are not safe to sit on, so that sort of area will change next year. But we do have a nice hammock that you can lie on, and this is just, another little room that was created. As you look over here, you see yet another archway, and that archway is saying this is another new space beyond that archway. It also helps give a little bit of a screen towards the wheelbarrow and some of the other elements that are less ideal to look at when you're sitting at the back of the yard. But really, it's just trying to define a space that you're going to a new area. When you look at it from this angle, you can see there's gates, and sometimes I close them just to really close off that space and give it a very different look. Coming into this area over here, I've used those two arrangements on either side of the structure to give it a grounding element. There used to be two of these beautiful trees. They are a standard version of a sand cherry, and so there was one that used to be over here, so it mirrored it. Unfortunately, that one died, but you got to live with the way that your yard looks, and I do like the way that it goes from this beautiful red into the golden color of that starburst honey locust. So let me just show you as you're in this room. You can't see them, but there are apartment buildings there, and they're blocked very nicely by all of these trees. And when you're sitting here in this area, let me just come to the back. The structure at the top here also gives an element of privacy, so that if somebody was sitting over in the apartment buildings, they couldn't look in as well. So I've tried to think of that. Now, we don't sit out here much in the wintertime, nor do people sit out on their balconies in the wintertime. So I don't really worry too much about wintertime privacy in the back here, with the exception of that one view from my kitchen, which is why we've put the evergreens in this area. So we were very lucky to have a pie-shaped lot, because this lot goes nice and deep in the back corner, which gave a nice space for us to be able to put this little privacy deck here in the back. But right in the far corner is also a sewer grate that the entire field drains into. So we try to keep that as a sort of a dry river. You can see the leaves have all fallen in the last 24 hours, filling up our dry river and actually even covering the grate. So I need to get in there and clean that out, because we're expecting a lot of rain tomorrow. But because the grate is also kind of ugly looking, I put in that beautiful Inukshuk structure, just built from stones from this area. So it's quite nice to hide the structure. It also makes sure that the leaves that are sitting in this dry river don't flow into there. So I had to think of that as a design element as well. Now, this is a funny area of the garden that I don't show you guys that much, but there is a path right here that takes you right back into the area where the gravel is. There's also a lot more trees and shrubs, and I've actually even have a whole pit that's in there. It goes way down low and it is really overgrown. I need to do a massive trimming on all of these boxwoods, and I will do that next spring, because to do them right now would not be good for the boxwoods. So this will be an area that we're going to work on next spring. I may put some sort of structural element there to really give it a bit of more pizzazz. But you can see I've tried to do that with those purple sand cherries and the boxwoods to try to create an element of color cascading as it goes through the yard. The other thing I've done is introduce plant materials that draw your eyes into specific areas. You can see with the use of the lamb's ears all along both of these gardens over here, they both draw your eye into that beautiful gated area. That was very specifically done because I wanted people to see that as the moment when they were looking at the garden. And I think it's been accomplished quite well. I'm looking at extending next year that same application of the lamb's ears into those gardens over there. I really do like it, and I find that there's some areas of the garden that are disappointing to me, but you also have to work with the amount of sun that you get, and this area specifically gets enough sun for that lamb's ears to just be really productive and beautiful. For areas that are secondary pathways, and I don't know if you can see it, but there is a pathway that goes right around this entire area. So it's the back way into my vegetable area. Anywhere that is a secondary pathway does not have a structural beginning, but what it does have is plants. So there's repetition between this side and that side of a hosta and some other plant materials that just sort of lead you in, but it's a much softer entranceway than using some of these structural elements into the yard. Right in front of you is a purple sand cherry. We have used that purple sand cherry tonight to build a really nice screen so that if somebody was walking on the sidewalk right in front of us, they couldn't see into the backyard. Let me just turn the camera around. So this is the view that they would have seen if they were walking from the street. We used to have the English walnut tree there, and we had a swing that sat right there. And so this just gave you some privacy to sit on the swing and contemplate without thinking about everybody walking down the street looking at you. Now, we've also put in this archway here to define that there's a new structure or a new space, a new room that's about to happen. In front of you, you can see that the pathway is brick. And as you move beyond the archway, the pathway switches into patio stones and bricks. So it's more of a gentle change into the new pathway. It's what I had, and that's what I used, and I think it works pretty well for this particular area. So as you walk here, there's the cedars that are along the deck. It also gives you a nice element of privacy along the deck. And then as you come into this area here, there is a step. Let me just see if I can show you. A couple of steps up, just to say you're in a new room again. We didn't create any sort of archway because it's very clear there's a new space that you've just stepped into. You can just barely make out the building over there. Again, there's more steps up into this area here. And I'll just show you the other part of the yard with the front so you can sort of see how that works in terms of rooms and spaces. The front of the house is really somewhat, I would say, plain compared to the backyard. What we tried to do was create more privacy here by using trees and shrubs, and we tried to soften some of the elements. We used a clematis here that climbs up the wall to break up some of the garage brick. And we've used baskets and urns to soften your approach into the front yard. And there's all sorts of extra trees here to just give more privacy from the street. I do have an archway here that says, come this way and come see what else is beyond. There's a pathway that is right now covered in material that needs to be picked up. So apologies for that. I'll just walk slowly to show you as you walk this way. There is a gate right here, also with a design element, and it arches upwards just to sort of say, hey, there's something a little bit different going on right now. And as you look back this way, you can see that same structure, just trying to give elements to the garden that provide structure and beauty. So as we open the gate, this is the area of the yard that I was saying is not as beautiful. Right now it is being worked on because I'm putting things away for the winter time. I've used the same approach to this part of the yard in terms of the patio stones and the little bricks, just so that there was consistency from side to side. And then as you walk into this area here, you can see there's the first gateway that says, oh, I'm about to step into something different. And of course, as you step into this area, we're now going to be stepping into grass. So again, the feel on your foot changes, and we're right back to where we started. So I hope this gives you a sense of how you can design your garden, taking into account things like wind. So that wind that we were getting from, I believe that would be the south, it sort of blocks that wind a little bit, so it gives us a nice space there in the corner to sit without a heavy wind bothering us. It gives us privacy here by planting the right trees to block out the buildings and the parking lot. And then we've built or planted different trees and shrubs close to the house to give more privacy closer to the house. And we used structures and different materials on the ground to create different feelings of rooms. Just like you would in your house, how you might have tiles and carpet. It's the same thing outside, thinking about how all of these pieces come together to just constantly keep you engaged in your surroundings so that you're actually not as aware of some of the things that could really bother you, like the buildings in the area. Now let's spend some time together and go over how I create all of the different garden plans before I actually start out in the yard. I try to take a lot of things into consideration, and I'd love to take you through my process so you have a better understanding on how the garden came to be before the plants got planted. When I first got the property, one of the first things I did was map out the yard. I used the survey plan that you get when you buy a house, and I mapped out how the house sits, including the driveway. And then I mapped out all of the existing trees that were on the property. Each of these dots represents one tree. And you can see right here, this is where the existing deck was. When I did the garden design, I just used tissue paper. Obviously, there's all sorts of programs that you can get online now, but for me, this has allowed me to be as creative as possible. What I wanted to do was also extend the deck, so I looked at how I could create a little smaller section of the deck, but also still keep that beautiful English or French double lilac tree that was there. Once I knew where my trees were and I had my new decks planned, I then thought about how big are each of these trees going to be so that I can consider their shade and also where the sun would be. Here's where our grass sits because that would get the most amount of sun. And here's where I started to build all of my gardens that were all pretty much shade at the time. I even planned out the front yard so I could look at how I could create more privacy here in the front, as well as elements that were in my yard and in my neighbor's yard. That tree is no longer there, unfortunately. I then used another overlay of tissue paper to create how I wanted the garden to look. You can see here, this is the area where the pink table sits, and it was all part of coming off of this deck. And it was designed with as many plants as possible to build that whole privacy screen towards that parking lot that was over that way. You can see that there's a gate in the original design. That gate sits more like right here right now, and that's because some of the trees and stuff that I've planted over the years have grown and died, so I've had to change the plan as it went. I also built this part of the deck to have a hot tub. We never put the hot tub in, and so the element here, which was a screen, never got built as well. You can see I still had an archway planned at one point. It's slightly different now, but there was an archway always planned. And I also had these little clumps of cedars, which unfortunately just won't grow in my yard. So even though I tried, I've had to take them out because they just won't grow well in clay soil. When I was originally doing the planning, I also looked at what about if I did more squares, triangles, rectangles, more harsh elements. I decided that I wanted curved spaces because it's gentler on the eye, but it also gave me an opportunity to really look at the space in a different way. You can see here I have notes here that says grass not growing under tree. There's a big shade area. I wanted some shrubs to block out my neighbor. I wanted to have some formal lines. I wanted a water feature to block some of the highway sounds. And I wanted a children's play area. So those were things I took into consideration as I was planning the garden. Here it says block, add privacy. And I wanted more privacy here and some greenery. So up here, it says an entertainment area, and this is where all my deck is right now. And here's another little privacy screen that I wanted to make sure that I considered. I'm not going to spend too much time here on the front yard because most of the design work that I have had to spend a lot of time on is here in the backyard. But it gives you an idea where you can take some time to consider what are the elements that you need to plan for as you're doing your design. Now, the other thing that I would do is I would then apply some color into my design so I get a sense of how all of these pieces fit together. So I could think about all the different colors throughout the seasons, whether they're flowers, whether it's the leaf color in autumn. I would try to think of all these pieces. These aren't always on the same type of paper. They're often just me in the car, away, just when ideas hit me. So I would be researching plants and I would think about how many plants I would need, and that I would think about, well, how would they look like? And I would just use pencil crayons to give me the different colors. So you can see here, I was playing around with a design here. Not all these designs come to be. Sometimes it's the affordability of the plants and I just can't afford them. Or sometimes if it's in a design like this where I have a water feature, which is now my feature pot, also changes. You can see here, those are the 3 trees that are at the back of the yard, and then behind them is a beautiful blue Colorado spruce, which my neighbor has just cut down, and he also had some other magnificent trees that have also been cut down. But you can see here's the magnolia, which has now grown all over here. There was a hibiscus, which has since died. And I had 2 Japanese maples. This one is still alive. This one has since deceased as well. So as I've planned the garden, not everything works out the way I want it to be, and I adjust and adapt as I. And in case you think you need to be an excellent drawer, you don't need to be. Look how sketchy this drawing is. But it just gives you an idea of the smoke trees that I had planted in the back. There's only one alive now. It gives you an idea to color combinations. And I've just marked what all the different trees are. And look how simple these drawings are. So don't overcomplicate it. You're just trying to think about what the colors would look like and the heights of the trees and how they would combine together. Here's the front yard, and you can see that I've got here's the coloring of the specific trees that are there. These are boxwoods, these are spirea. This is a Japanese maple, so not at all what's there. And this is the magnolia that is sitting here. So it just gives you an idea of how you can use a little bit of color to sort of think about how all your pieces come together. This is another little sketch where I just was falling in love with the shape of these urns and was trying to figure out how I could use them. I'm not even sure I owned the urns at that point, but I was just thinking about them as a structural element, and they've come to be in the garden as well. Always in my dreams was a beautiful water fountain. So I've drawn it many times into my designs, and yet it's not in my garden. And instead, I have a small fountain that's against the wall that I can remove. And instead, I have a beautiful feature pot. And that feature pot allows me to have something of interest all season long, because this fountain, although beautiful, would not work well in a Canadian wintertime, because I would have to have boards over it or plastic over it for 50% of the year. And I really wanted to think about what design element could I add to the yard that would have the same sort of baskety feel that you get from a fountain. And that's why the feature pot was chosen. So one of the reasons that I am showing you sort of all of these behind the scenes aspects of planning out a garden is so that you get an understanding of how these things all come to be. It's not always just a walk out to the yard and plant something. I love to use the winter time to think about what my future garden could look like. I like to plan things out. It is so much cheaper to plan it out and decide exactly what plant you want to use than to buy the incorrect plants. Sometimes I do buy the incorrect plants. It doesn't mean it's a perfect science, but it does allow you to figure out what could your garden potentially look like. It allows freedom of ideas, and by not using your computer, it allows you to just step away to freely think about all the different spaces Surely, if you love using your computer, you can go and use your computer for these designs. But I really do find it's just so much easier to just play and just have creative thoughts jump into your head and say, what would that look like? What would that look like? And not have to think about how the technology makes it happen. Thank you so much for taking the tour with me today. I really did enjoy sharing the elements of what makes a good design with you. As you plan your future spaces out, taking into consideration the way that the sun shines in your garden, the way the wind blows, and the buildings or anything else that you want to hide to create more privacy is such an important part of planning. When you take those into consideration as you begin your plan, you can actually build for the future with each plant that you put into your garden. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, you can also subscribe to this channel just by hitting the subscribe button. And if you press the little bell icon, you will also get notified whenever I publish a new video. I certainly love all of your kind comments and any ideas that the group gives here, because I find gardeners really are truly some of the nicest people out there. Have fun in your garden and take a moment to always reflect where the garden is at. Dream big, dream for the future, and your garden will be the perfect space for you at any given time. Take care now. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along. We'd love to have you for this wonderful journey as we adventure into homesteading and all different things that have to do with the beauty of food and nature and how it all comes together to build a beautiful, fulfilling life. Take care, everyone.